1966, Dodge needed a weapon for the muscle car war, and the Charger arrived with fastback glass, hidden headlights, bucket seats, and V8 attitude baked into every panel. But this nameplate refused to stay in one lane. It became a wingless boulevard bruiser, a personal luxury coupe, a front-wheel drive hatchback with Shelby fingerprints, then came roaring back in the 2000s with 4 doors, rear-wheel drive, and Hemi Thunder. Now, after decades of burnouts, police chases, drag nights, movie stardom, and family sedans that could embarrass sports cars, the classic Charger V8 is facing its final curtain. So how did one badge survive this many identity swaps and still become American muscle shorthand? Tonight, we follow the fever from first spark to last roar. That was not polite advertising. That was Dodge admitting the showroom had become a battlefield. For 1966 and 1967, the Charger had the right idea: a sleek, fastback shape, full-width lamps, and V8 power aimed at younger buyers. Sales were respectable, not explosive. The car looked futuristic, but the market was getting louder, meaner, and less patient. By 1968, Pontiac had the GTO, Chevrolet had the Chevelle SS, Ford had the Mustang Fastback, and Plymouth was sharpening the Roadrunner. Dodge needed more than a sporty coupe. It needed something that looked illegal while parked. This is where it all changed. The second-generation Charger arrived with Coke bottle fenders, a long hood, a short deck, a tunneled rear window, and a fastback roofline that finally looked muscular instead of experimental. The hidden headlights stayed, but the whole face became lower, wider, and angrier. Under the skin, the lineup still let buyers choose their level of trouble. A 318 cubic inch V8 could keep things reasonable, while the 383 and the 426 Hemi pushed the Charger into serious street territory. The 1968 redesign gave Dodge the shape people still picture today, but the body was only the beginning, because the R/T package was about to turn that shape into a full-blown street weapon, Scat Pack. In 1968, Dodge gave the Charger a badge that sounded like a threat, R/T, short for road and track. The package made the Charger more than a pretty hardtop. Standard power was the 440 cubic inch Magnum V8, rated at 375 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque. Dodge backed it with heavy-duty suspension, stronger brakes, performance tires, and either a 4-speed manual or the Torque Flight automatic. This was not a trim package with a louder sticker. It was the factory saying, yes, take this one seriously. Then came the visual punch, the bumblebee stripe wrapped around the tail. Buyers could delete it, but why would you? That stripe became a warning label, especially when paired with hidden headlights, chrome Magnum wheels, and that wide rear stance. Parked at the curb, the R/T looked like it was already late for a street race. Performance matched the attitude. Contemporary tests and reports put the 440 Charger R/T deep into muscle car territory, with a top speed around 132 miles per hour. For the late 1960s, that was not just fast. That was exotic car conversation from a Dodge showroom. And then there was the monster, the 426 Hemi V8. Officially rated at 425 horsepower, it was expensive, temperamental, and ordered by only a small fraction of buyers. That rarity is exactly why Hemi Charger R/T cars became collector mythology. They were not common street machines. They were legends hiding in production records. The 1968 Charger R/T is the golden image Charger people remember today. Long hood, tucked cabin, tail stripe, big block thunder, and a sense that Detroit had briefly lost adult supervision. But the legend was not finished. The car had conquered the street and the showroom. Next, it was about to become immortal on screen, where a black Charger would turn muscle car menace into movie history. In 1968, the Charger did something most cars never do. It became the car audiences feared before the driver said a word. That happened in Bullitt, when a black 1968 Dodge Charger R/T stalked Steve McQueen's Mustang through San Francisco. The Charger was not just background metal. With its hidden headlights, dark grille, wide hips, and big block 440 power, it looked heavier, meaner, and almost unstoppable. The chase worked because the Charger felt like a predator. Every jump, every slide, every roar off the buildings made it the perfect screen villain. That film burned the second-generation Charger into public memory. The 1968 redesign had already fixed the first car's awkward market position, but Bullitt gave it a personality. It could be polished enough for the boulevard and dangerous enough for a crime scene. That combination was rare, and Dodge had nailed it. Then television flipped the script. In 1979, the Dukes of Hazzard turned the Charger into a hero car with the orange General Lee. The show mainly used 1969 Chargers, along with other 1968 to 1970 cars dressed to match. But the body style was the point. Flying buttress roof, long hood, short deck, and that unmistakable full-width stance. 1 minute the Charger was chasing McQueen. A decade later, it was jumping rivers, barns, and sheriff's cars with a horn everyone recognized. That is why this shape became the Charger image for generations. It worked in black as a terrifying nemesis. It worked in orange as a television folk hero. On the street, it was a bruiser with 440 and HEMI credibility. On bedroom walls and magazine covers, it was a dream machine that looked fast standing still. Few cars can change roles without losing identity. The 1968 to 1970 Charger did it because the design had presence before the engine even fired. And Dodge was not finished chasing speed. While Hollywood made the Charger famous, NASCAR was about to force Dodge into something even wilder, one of the most outrageous factory muscle cars ever built. That was Dodge selling the Daytona politely. The car itself was not polite at all. By 1969, the regular Charger looked fast, but on superspeedways, its blunt nose, recessed grille, and rear lift cost Dodge precious miles per hour. The first fix was the Charger 500 with a cleaner grille and rear window. It helped, but not enough. Ford was still dangerous, and Dodge needed a weapon built for the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing rulebook. This is where it all changed. Dodge took the Charger and turned it into an aerodynamic science project with license plates. The Daytona wore a long pointed nose cone that sliced through air instead of punching it. Out back, a tall rear wing added stability at racing speed, high enough to clear the trunk lid, and wild enough to make every parking lot feel like pit lane. Compared with a regular Charger, it looked less like a street car and more like a factory dare. Under the hood, buyers could get the 440 cubic inch Magnum V8, rated at 375 horsepower, or the legendary 426 HEMI V8, officially rated at 425 horsepower. With the HEMI, the Daytona had the full homologation special attitude, built in limited numbers, sold to the public, and aimed directly at victory lane. Dodge built just over 500 Daytonas to satisfy racing rules, and the payoff was historic. On March 24, 1970, Buddy Baker drove a Charger Daytona to a closed-course lap of 200.447 miles per hour at Talladega. It became the first National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing stock car to break 200 miles per hour. That was the Charger's racing legend at full height, outrageous, effective, and impossible to ignore. But the same forces that made it famous were about to close in. New regulations, rising insurance costs, and the early 1970s would start changing the muscle car game for everyone. In 1971, Dodge redesigned the Charger from the pavement up, and the road and track badge survived like a clenched fist in a tightening vice. The third-generation Charger rode on a shorter 115-inch wheelbase and wore Chrysler's fuselage-era curves, a longer-looking hood, a fastback roofline, a loop front bumper, and a split grille that made the car look wider and lower. The old Coke bottle aggression was still there, but it was cleaner, heavier, and more grown up. Buyers could choose Special Edition Luxury, Super B Budget Muscle, or the Road and Track, the one that still carried the serious hardware. For 1971, the Charger Road and Track came standard with the 440 cubic inch Magnum V8, rated at 375 gross horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque. In the right tune, it could hit 0 to 60 60 miles per hour in the mid 6-second range and push toward 130 miles per hour. The rare king remained the 426 cubic inch HEMI V8, still rated at 425 gross horsepower. Fewer than 100 Charger road and track cars left the factory with it, making the 1971 HEMI Charger one of the rarest bruisers of the era. But the numbers were already under siege. 1971 brought lower compression for many engines, new emissions requirements were moving fast, and buyers were beginning to look at comfort, economy, and image differently. The Charger was being asked to be both muscle car and personal luxury coupe, and that split personality would define the decade. So the 1971 road and track was not weak. It was a last hard swing from Dodge before the walls moved in. Emissions and fuel anxiety had started the squeeze, and next, insurance companies would hit performance cars where it hurt most, the monthly payment. By 1973, that was not just a warning from the showroom, it was the reality waiting in the insurance office. The Charger still looked like a machine with bad intentions, but the business around it had changed fast. Insurance companies had learned to punish big engines, performance badges, and young drivers with brutal premiums. A buyer might afford the monthly payment on a Charger, then discover the insurance bill made the whole dream impossible. That pressure changed what Dodge could realistically advertise, build, and stock on dealer lots. Dodge kept the road and track formula alive in spirit with the Charger Rally. V8 power, heavy-duty suspension, bold graphics, and the attitude of a car that still wanted to run. Engine choices included the 318 cubic inch V8, the 340, the 400, and the big 440. But the numbers were now rated in net horsepower, not the old gross ratings. So the mighty 440 sat around 280 net horsepower. Strong, yes. Untamed, no. 1973 also brought the safety era right onto the Charger's face. Federal bumper rules pushed Detroit into heavier, more impact-friendly designs, and Dodge answered with larger chrome bumpers and prominent rubber guards. The Charger's shape was still handsome, still long-hooded and dramatic, but those new details made it clear this car now had to satisfy Washington before it could satisfy Woodward Avenue. The well-optioned 440 Charger could still run 0 to 60 miles per hour in roughly the 7-second range and reach about 120 miles per hour. But the swagger was being managed. Lower compression, emissions hardware, insurance surcharges, and safety rules were all pulling in the same direction. The Charger name survived 1973, but the muscle car battlefield was closing. And next, Dodge would make the most dramatic move yet, turning the Charger toward personal luxury. For 1975, the Charger did not just get detuned, it got reinvented. This is where it all changed. Dodge redesigned the Charger from the ground up, and the target was no longer the stoplight warrior. The new mission was personal luxury. Long hood, formal roofline, opera window attitude, soft trim, quiet cruising, and a buyer who cared more about velour and vinyl tops than quarter-mile slips. The blueprint was sitting right across the Chrysler showroom. The new Charger SE was closely tied to the Chrysler Cordoba, the car that made personal luxury feel profitable in the middle of fuel shortages, emissions rules, and shrinking performance dreams. Dodge took that formula and put the Charger name on it, creating a coupe that looked more country club than drag strip. Under the hood, V8 power still mattered, but now it served smoothness, not intimidation. In 1975, the Charger SE could be ordered with engines like the 318, 360, or 400 cubic inch V8. Even the stronger 400 was living in the reduced output era, around 190 net horsepower. That number was usable, respectable, and completely distant from the old HEMI days. By 1978, the transformation was complete. A Charger SE with the 318 two-barrel V8 and TorqueFlite 3-speed automatic made around 140 horsepower. 0 to 60 miles per hour took roughly 13 seconds, which meant the car moved with dignity. utility, not urgency. The Charger badge was now attached to a luxury cruiser with a famous name and very little of the old menace. And yet, that is what makes this chapter fascinating. Dodge did not kill the Charger in the 70s. It changed the meaning of the word. But could the Charger name survive after losing almost everything that made it famous? The wildest Charger reset was not the luxury coupe. It was a front-wheel drive hatchback with a 4-cylinder. By 1981, Chrysler was fighting for survival, and Dodge needed small cars that could satisfy fuel economy rules, insurance realities, and buyers who had moved on from big block bravado. So the Charger name landed on the Charger 2.2, a compact hatchback based on Chrysler's front-wheel drive L-body platform. Under the hood sat a 2.2-liter 4-cylinder, making about 94 horsepower. For longtime Charger fans, this felt like a nameplate identity crisis in full public view. The old recipe had been rear-wheel drive, long sheet metal, V8 rumble, and tire smoke. This new car was light, economical, practical, and driven by the front wheels. It was almost the exact opposite of the machines that made the badge famous. But Dodge was not completely done fighting for credibility. In 1983, Carroll Shelby entered the picture, and the Shelby Charger gave the little hatchback a much sharper edge. The 2.2-liter engine received a revised camshaft, a better flowing exhaust, and tuning changes that pushed output to around 107 horsepower. That still was not HEMI territory, but in a small front-drive car, it mattered. Shelby's real work was in the chassis. The Shelby Charger got quicker steering feel, firmer suspension tuning, performance tires, and vented front disc brakes that made it far more confident than the regular car. With a manual transmission, 0 to 60 miles per hour landed in the roughly 9-second range, and top speed climbed to around 117 miles per hour. Suddenly, the Charger badge had a pulse again. It was not the return of the muscle car. It was a survival-era performance experiment built with limited horsepower and a lot of attitude. Shelby did not restore the old Charger identity, but he proved Dodge could still make something fun out of the name. Then the Charger disappeared from its classic form for years, waiting for the moment Dodge would shock everyone with a modern rear-wheel drive HEMI revival. Then, in 2006, Dodge brought the Charger back with 2 extra doors and one very loud message. The HEMI had returned. The new Charger was not a coupe, and purists noticed immediately. But underneath, it had the right bones: rear-wheel drive, aggressive stance, and available V8 power. The real statement was the Charger SRT8. Its 6.1-liter HEMI V8 made 425 horsepower, launched from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 4.8 seconds, and used Brembo brakes to haul the big sedan back down with authority. This is where it all changed. By 2011, the 7th-generation Charger sharpened the formula. Dodge improved visibility, cleaned up the interior, and gave the body a meaner face, with a crosshair grille, sculpted sides, and full-width rear lighting that nodded to the classic muscle era. The Charger RT carried a 5.7-liter HEMI V8 with 370 horsepower, good for 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 5.2 seconds. It was family-sized, but it did not act domesticated. Then came the 2012 SRT8, and Dodge turned the volume up again. The 6.4-liter HEMI V8 produced 470 horsepower, cut 0 to 60 miles per hour to about 4.3 seconds, and could reach 175 miles per hour. Active suspension gave it real control, while Brembo's stopping power made sure the performance was not just straight-line theater. In 2015, the facelift brought slimmer headlights, a more modern front end, and the 8-speed automatic transmission that made the Charger feel quicker, smoother, and more complete. After decades of reinvention, confusion, and survival, the Charger was well and truly back. But that comeback arrived just before the next pressure wave: electrification, emissions rules, and the slow closing of the traditional V8 era. If you owned one, drove one, or simply heard one rumble past, drop your Charger memory in the comments. Like the video, subscribe, and hit notifications for more muscle car history. From the 1968 fast fastback icon to the Daytona wing car, from the emissions-era survivor to the front-wheel drive 1980s oddball. The Charger kept changing shape without losing its attitude. Then the 2000s HEMI cars brought the name roaring back, and the modern Hellcat years turned it into a four-door legend. Now, as the traditional V8 Charger bows out, its legacy is rebellion with a VIN number. Thanks for watching. Which Charger era is your favorite? Did you own one? Tell us in the comments. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.